How was your weekend? Was it? It was good?
Yeah.
Seen it, rock and roll, all that kind of stuff? Oh my gosh, you people are boring. Good grief. That's an excuse to be boring? It's supposed to be the other way around, Sherry. You're supposed to look at me and say, you're old, and that's my excuse for being boring. I went to Indianapolis Motor Speedway and went to a wedding in Indy and had a great weekend. You guys, I bought you a life. So.
You went to the Motor Speedway this weekend?
Yeah, there wasn't a race. There wasn't a race. So I was in Indianapolis for a wedding of a nephew. And I'm a gearhead, Bobby. I love fast cars and good-looking women. And although I'm not sure that it's in that order of preference, but nonetheless. I haven't been to Indianapolis for about 25 years. And the opportunity to go to the Speedway, and because some of you know, that's kind of like Mecca for fast in the United States. Any of you ever go to any NASCAR events? Nobody? You guys.
No, that's boring. Rick.
You're a NASCAR guy?
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I couldn't tell you all the drivers' names and such. I like to watch it. I like to go to NASCAR events.
That's
and be in the pits.
That would have been like the last thing I would have guessed.
Really?
Yeah.
Not so much with the beer guzzling, and you're almost never going to see me with that funny kind of haircut thing with long in the back and not much going on in the front.
Roll with it.
Okay.
You go to the drags at all?
No, I haven't for maybe 30 years. Yeah. I just too much waiting around, too little action.
Got it.
Yeah, for me. Yeah.
Is NASCAR your favorite sport?
Pardon me?
Is NASCAR your favorite sport?
No, believe it or not, lacrosse. But only in the last few years I've been watching some of you guys on, I don't know, anybody in here on the lacrosse? I don't think so. But we have a bunch of students, especially in our Business 101 class, we have the guys on the lacrosse team. And I always had supposed that lacrosse was just another form of soccer. And I didn't realize it was a great game. I dig watching lacrosse. Anyway, well look, what I want to do this morning is I want to discuss any questions you might have on that Excel assignment that you're working on. Then I want to go ahead and we're actually going to split up into some groups, come to the board, and I've got a set of numbers that I want you guys to give me a present value, a net present value, and a IRR, and we're going to talk about the inference of some of those and maybe even get a sense of what we think MIRR might look like. Kind of put some practice to our numbers. And then I want to go ahead and talk about sources of growth. Okay? So with that, what questions do you have with respect to the Excel assignment you're working on? Please.
When determining the EV,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what G to use.
Okay.
And so can you like give us a hint of where to?
I
Is that
think-
going to be like SGR or IGR, or should we be using?
I think that EV, and you're trying to,
Unless I interpreted what EV.
hang on a
is
second,
wrong.
am I asking you,
You're asking for
yeah, I don't
everyday
think
market.
you need G for EV, do you? Because I think you've got the book value of the instruments, and I think you have the market value of the instruments. Zach, I think what you're trying to do is estimate the value, knowing that that estimated value and EV are synonymous.
Okay.
And in the estimation, you would need G. But I believe I give you the market value of the equity instruments, do I not? And then you have the tools to get the market value of the debt instruments.
Okay.
And you see the book values, and you know what cash is.
Okay.
So you don't need G. Please, Kara.
Regarding finding the market value of the debt, I was having a little bit of trouble
Okay.
reaching that number.
Were you 0.96 off?
No, I just couldn't get that. I don't know if I was using the wrong formula or inputting it wrong. So I was
Okay.
wondering how are you getting that number?
Okay. So the first thing that we do when you're looking at a balance sheet and it tells you about the bonds, gives you a book value of bonds, I think the first thing you want to do is identify how many bonds are in that number. Okay, remind me what the number is on this.
For the number of bonds,
For the book value of the bonds.
30.584.
Okay, 30.584. And so I believe that's 30,584,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many dollars per bond in face value? What's the face value of a bond?
1,000.
Virtually always 1,000. So we're gonna do a dividing by 1,000, and so it's gonna tell us then that there are 30,584 bonds. Okay, so that's the first thing I do when I want to know the full market value of the bond instruments. Now I'm going to set up the bond value equation. So the bond value is equal to C 1 minus 1 divided by 1 plus YTM to the N divided by YTM plus F divided by 1 plus YTM to the N. Okay? Who remembers what C equals? You don't need to give me the number, but how to find C in this equation. What do you think, Brew? Okay. Zach?
So for the payment, it's our payment, so.
It's our payment, isn't it? Okay. How do we find the payment?
We would just take the rate, so that 14% multiplied by $1,000.
Where'd you get the 14%?
I think it's given, it's our coupon rate.
Yeah, so the coupon rate times the dollar amount per bond face value divided by the periods per year. And so if it's 14%, and if there's 2 periods a year, and it's $1,000 face value, I believe that every payment is $70, right? Okay. 1 minus, 1 divided by, 1 plus. What is YTM in this case?
Yield to maturity.
It's yield to maturity. Do we have information given that helps us understand what this is going to be in this equation? What the number is going to be?
6%.
So is YTM 6% or is the current yield 6%? Yeah. What's the difference? Alex, do you know the difference?
Well, the current yield is what you're getting like now, and the yield to maturity is future, isn't it?
Well, not exactly, but some of that's correct. So the current yield, as we state that, is what one would reasonably expect to get on a debt instrument of that type for a company of that type and that debt duration, dollar amount, right now, current, okay? So in this case, I think we've said it's 6%, but YTM, just like payment and N, need to be expressed in like temporal terms, right? So if this is half a year worth of payment, then this must be half a year of interest. So if the current yield is 6%, we have to take the current yield divided by the periods per year. So it's going to be 0.03. What does the N represent?
Year. Time periods.
Time periods. How do I get to time periods in this case?
Number of years times payments per year.
Number of years times payments per year. So how many years do I have remaining to maturity? That's a question, by the way.
So we have 15 years to 2 payments, so 30.
30. Yep. Okay. And that's the equation. Okay. Now in this case, we're looking for the market value of the debt, which is principally the market value of the bonds for the company, right? But is it exclusively the market value of the bonds? What else is there?
Mortgage.
There's a mortgage. and we see that at 0.96 on the balance sheet, so $960,000. How are we going to assess its market value? Sherry, how do we calculate the market value of a mortgage?
Do you just accept the 0.96 as your market value?
Yeah, unless you're given lots of other information that would help you actually hone in on a real market value, which you almost never have available to you, okay? And even if you do, the vast majority of decision analytics wouldn't go that far. So you're just gonna accept the mortgage's book value as though it was the market value, which is pretty close.
If you're putting together security of mortgages, what would you, like, when you're valuing them, what would, I mean, I know you have to grade them and rate them and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Would you try and sell
yeah.
them for more or less than what the mortgage is stated at?
So what, I think what you're asking about, correct me if I'm wrong, if we are bundling an entire portfolio of mortgages on a variety of properties, a variety of borrowers, maybe they emanated from a variety of lenders even initially, right? With a variety of interest rates and probably a variety of maturities or due dates. But most of the time, a pool like that is going to be of somewhat, expected to be of somewhat similar interest rate or credit worthiness when the mortgages were originated, okay? So how would you go about amalgamating all of that? This is the stuff that a crisis was made of, okay, right? I mean, the appropriate way to do it is to look at each and every mortgage, the creditworthiness of the borrower, do an assessment of the current market value of the underlying property, and this would be the current creditworthiness of the borrower, not the creditworthiness of the borrower when the mortgage was issued, right? So the current creditworthiness of the borrower, the market value of the underlying mortgage, and then you would also consider this interest rate at issue, so stated rate versus current yield, and look at the friction there, because it's that friction that drives a lot of this change, right? And then you would amalgamate all that. It's extraordinarily complex. I mean, we could do it together for 10 mortgages, right? But mortgage pools that were then securitized weren't 10 mortgages. They were 200,000 mortgages, okay? So extraordinarily complex. No wonder that we ended up with disaster, especially when the mortgage origination markets have become so loose and so abusive. Okay? What other questions? I think that this number ended up being about $1,784 a bond, is that right? Something like that? And then you multiply it with this number of bonds to get the actual dollar value of the bond, market value of the bond portfolio. Then you're going to divide it back by $1,000 to get it back into the same parlance that we're using here, the same decimal parlance, and then add 0.96 to it. That's the market value of the debt. Okay? What else? Anything? Okay. I don't believe I have open for you the spreadsheet that shows you all the internal calculations, do I?
No.
Okay. I will open that for you after you turn this in, okay? Because I want you to then go ahead and look at what you've done and what I've done, and you might have the right number there, but you may have gotten it in a way that I don't want you to get it. Some of these numbers you can easily get in a couple of different ways, but if you get it in a way that's not a good model form, then as you expand your model into a variety of tabs on the spreadsheet, it's not as valuable for you. So I'm going to ask you, after you've gone ahead and gotten my copy of it, to go back into yours, update yours so that everything that you've done looks like everything that I've done, and not just in the number that shows up in the cell, but the formula underlying the number. So that then when we do the next assignment, which I'll give you at the end of this week, or Wednesday, next assignment, you can build on this thing as you're building a good multi-tabular model. Okay? All right, so with that, I have 4 scenarios, so if I do 3, 3, 2, and 2. Let's do that. So 3 of you, not you. Brigham and Mickle, Garrett, Sherry. I'm going to put some cash flows on the boards for you guys. And you're going to come up and you are going to calculate present value, net present value, internal rate of return on each of these. Give me just a moment. Let's do that. I want to give you all the cash flows, I'll just give you the bases of them. So here we're at R.
Yeah, I think we go there. Maybe solve that.
Okay, I believe I've given you enough information to come up with present value. I'm going to have you come to the board to do it. I want you to work together. Okay, and to come up with present value, net present value, and internal rate of return. On this one, there's a little bit of a wrinkle. Our first year's cash flow is negative $5,000. The second year cash flow is 0. The third year cash flow is $3,500, and then we have growth of that cash flow through year 5 at 22%. Discount rate of 20%, long-term growth at 8%, proposed investment amount of $20,000. Here we have a proposed investment amount of $39,000, cash flow for the first year of $1,980, discount rate of 12%. Cash flow or growth of the cash flow in years 1 through 5 to 10%, and long term at 6%. Cost of $9,000. First cash flow is $6,000. Discount rate 18%. Growth of the cash flow during years 1 through 5 to 20%. Perpetual growth at 20%. And then finally, a cost of $20,000. Cash flow in year 1 of $1,500. discount rate of 7%, years 1 through 5 growth at 10, and long-term growth rate at 7%. So I think it was the three of you are here, please. Three of you. Second scenario, you two, third, and then the two of you fourth. So we've looked at some of these kinds of numbers on the board now a few times, right? Was this helpful? Good. That was helpful. So I want to walk through and discuss some of the idiosyncrasies. A couple of you guys had ones that were just pretty commonsensical, and a couple of you scratched your heads, and for good reason. They just didn't make a lot of sense. And I'm not sure we have all the right numbers, but I think we have enough of what's going on to have a good conversation about it now. I think that these are in order with the way we've got them on the board, but some of our numbers will be different, so we're just going to kind of talk them through. So the first group, tell us what you did. Help us make sense of your numbers.
So we had 20,000 was our cost, so that's our cash flow at time 0.
Okay.
Then our cash flow, was a negative 5,000 for cash flow 1, and a 0 for cash flow 2, 3,500 cash flow 3, 4,270 for cash flow 4. Then 5,209 for cash flow 5 plus the 46.
Well, 5209 is the cash flow in year 5.
Right, and then
Okay.
we added the continuing value of 46,883 to that.
And how did you get that?
We took cash flow 6 based on the 0.08 on the 5209. That
Francesco, why did he take the cash flow in times 6 to add it to a number in time 5?
Because that's the first year of the continuation period.
Okay. Okay. And the equation is CF1 divided by R minus G to get the continuation term. Or dividend at time 1 divided by R minus G, whatever the cash flow is. And R, remember, is simply a discount rate. And we now know that WACC is a discount rate, or hurdle rate is a discount rate, or required return is a discount rate. They're all discount rates. Okay? All right. So then you had the cash flows. Looks like you added that continuing value to the cash flow in year 5. Kira, why did you add it to year 5? Why not year 6?
Because year 5 is year 0 of the continuation period.
Right, and remember, and I always do this in my little head, right? P0 equals D1 divided by R minus G. P0 equals D1 divided by R minus G. That's the dividend yield equation, and I use that rather than value at time 0 equals CF1 divided by R minus G, just because that's in every finance textbook you're ever going to have, and you dealt with it in Finance 300. P0 equals D1 divided by R minus G. You just got to remember, P is a value or price at time 0. D is a cash flow if you had the common stock. Right now we're not looking only at the common stock, but the whole company, so we want the whole cash flow. Okay? All right. So you added all those up, you put them into your cash flow register, and it gave you what?
net present value of 852, and we did the present value, which is just that value, not accounting for costs. So you add back the 20,000.
You added back 20,000. And that seems like an awfully simple way to do that. Is that a credible way to do it? Is it the right way?
You could do the same calculations with 0 and cash flow 0, or just add back the cost of it. I think.
Well, you can either take the net present value, add back into it the investment amount to get net present value, right? So you can take, excuse me, to get present value, thank you. And does that always give you the exact same number as if you had run a net present value calculation? It does. So it's equally as credible, and it's simpler, and if you have the data, why not, right? Now, that said, I always validate it by doing the other equation just to make sure I didn't screw something up. How easy is it to mess up something in one of these little steps? Very. So I pretty much always cross-check these. Okay? This is why I've been talking to you about inferences. Because if you know what something should look like, or if you know what it means when it looks a certain way, and you can then sometimes tell if your answer is in the right area, right? If you're in the ballpark, or you may be stout left field. Okay? So in this case, we end up with a net present value of 852 and an IRR of what, that 20.91%? Does that surprise us at all, that the IRR is 20.91%?
Not when our R is 20%.
Okay. How come? Why does the relationship between R and IRR, why did you answer it like that?
Because if that 20, if that's the rate that our investment is growing, our internal rate of return, you'd want it to reflect pretty closely to that.
Why?
Well, because if it's way lower, then you could have put your money somewhere.
Does anybody else see the answer I'm trying to get to, or are we playing guess what's on my mind? Okay, guess what's on my mind. Sorry about that. When the net present value on a relative basis is so close to zero, and when you're dealing with $20,000, $852 isn't much, right? When the net present value is so close to zero, the discount rate of 20% should be very similar to the internal rate of return, right? And when this is positive, we know that the internal rate of return is going to be slightly greater than the discount rate, or something greater than the discount rate. If it's slight, then it's going to be a slight difference. If this was $8,520 greater, or if the net present value was $8,520 on a present value like this, then we would expect the IRR to be much bigger, right? So think about those relationships. And when I said inferences, that's part of what I'm talking about. You're cross-checking in your mind all the time. That does a couple of things. It tells you whether or not you're in the right ballpark, but you are now being able to put together pieces critically to see how to look at it different ways. Okay? So I think those numbers are all accurate. They're all accurate. Took you a few minutes to do that, didn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna get rid of that one. I guess that's what it equals. Yeah. So you got to remember that when we're looking at creating a net present value on our calculator or in Excel, we've got to come up with a series of cash flows that are finite and that have the right time signatures. Okay? Let's go to the second group. Walk us through what you guys have here. This is nice and clean compared to us over here. Well, no, these guys have some other complexities because they had some changing cash flows at non-constant rates. You guys have changing cash flows, but at a constant rate. So what do we got here?
So we used the cost, 39,000 as our cash flow zero, and then used the 10% growth rate for years 1 through 5 to get those numbers. And then on the 5th year, we used the dividend yield and took this actually.
Is that what this is, right?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's kind of doesn't look very well.
So where does this 3073 come from?
That's 2899 times 1.06.
Okay, so I know the number. I now know how you calculate it. Where does it come from? When does that? Trying to get you guys to make a connection. This number lives at time 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Probably seems weird to you. I say things. It lives at a point in time. It's a number. It doesn't live anyplace, right? I'm trying to get you to think in that context. It's as of that point in time. Okay, so you then took this value and you added it to this cash flow to give you your total either present value, or if you took out here, then your net present value.
Mm-hmm.
So net present value is negative. Do we walk away? We say bad, walk away?
Not necessarily.
Why not, Alex? I don't like negative. Negative's not happy.
Well, I don't know exactly, but
I think you do. Think back to the conversation we had over here about what a positive net present value meant. So, Bobby, if Alex has come up with a negative net present value, what do I now know, even without looking at other numbers?
That it'll be lower than your discount rate,
What is the it that will be lower?
the IRR.
Yeah, my internal rate of return will be less than my discount rate if net present value is less than 0. There's a direct correlation. If it was equal to 0, net present value, then the discount rate and the IRR are the same. Okay. And we already know when it's positive. All right. So here we have a present value of $37,590. We're asked to make an investment of $39,000. If we make that investment, what does it tell us about our required rate of return? Is it 12%, as the discount rate suggests? Why not, Alex?
Because if it's negative, it's lower.
Well, it's not negative. I mean, that's positive.
Yeah,
If we agree to pay $39,000, even after we calculate that it really only should have a value of $37,590, we're saying that we're willing to accept 11.1% rather than 12, aren't we? So apparently 12 wasn't really our required rate. It was our line in the sand, maybe. We got pushed back. Is that a real big problem? No. No. Maybe it's because it's the best thing available to us. I mean, I might like 12% more than 11.1, but does 11.1 sound bad? No, it's an issue of alternatives, right? Remember that these elements we're dealing with are decision criteria elements. They're not just numbers. They help us make decisions, okay? So, Nickel and Brigham, you guys had a funky one. What's going on here?
So the numbers that we have right up there, I believe, is the CV that's in red. It's kind of hard to see from here, and then the NPV in the right side. And I don't know if Michael wants to go.
Well, let's talk this through for a minute. So we have a cash flow at time 1, and we have a constant rate of growth in perpetuity. And we have a discount rate, and maybe a cost. Now, not Brigham and Mickle, because you guys know the problem with it. Does anybody immediately see a simplicity and maybe simultaneously a critical problem? What's the simplicity? So, remember what our basic construction is of a valuation estimate. So we've got some value equaling the sum of the cash flows at times I divided by 1 plus R to the T during our explicit period,
So 0
right?
divided by 0 is what's going to happen when you're.
Well, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there, okay? We've got to think about the simplicity before we can recognize the problem. Plus the cash flow at time 1, continuation time 1, divided by R minus G, divided by 1 plus R to the T. So the present, and this would be a continuation. So the present value of the discounted cash flow in the explicit period, plus the present value of the continuing value, right? Kira, when we have a constant growth rate, so growth in years 1 through 5 was 20%, growth beyond that in perpetuity was also 20%. Can I simplify this?
Yeah, you can just use the continuing value.
Right? I can just use the continuing value. If I do that, do I have to now discount the continuing value back to time 1? Or time 0, excuse me.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, if I simply use a continuing value form, do I have to now discount it back to today?
Could, yeah.
Yes.
You don't have to.
Think about this. Value at time 0, or continuing value in this case, is equal to cash flow at time 1 divided by R minus G, right? if the growth in the cash flows in the explicit period and the continuation period are the same average annual growths, then we can use simply this one equation to calculate the whole thing. We don't need to do both, because this part was growing at the exact same rate as this part, so we simply do this. We simply use the continuing form. Now, if this is the only thing we've used, when does this number live as of? Now. Right now. It is already discounted back, isn't it? It's already discounted back. So we don't have to do that. So that was the simplification. Now, what was the tragic or critical problem? Pardon?
You're taking cash flow for zero.
Well, not in this one. In the next one, we might do that. We've got R at 18%, G at 20. So it's not zero. R minus G is what?
It's a negative. It's
Negative.
0.02.
So you guys ended up with a grossly negative number.
Yeah.
And we wanted you to pay us $9,000 to get it. So if and I think that this became negative 30,000, is that right?
No, I think it was even higher.
May have been. You guys actually have it in front of you.
300,000.
300,000, thank you. So if you have a present value of negative 300,000 and a cost of negative 9,000, or cost of 9,000, what is your net present value?
Negative 309.
Negative $309,000, right? What is your internal rate of return? If you put 9,000 into something and you never get any return, what is your internal rate of return? Yeah, if it could be calculated as a negative, it would be negative, right? I don't think your calculator will calculate a negative IRR. Maybe it will, maybe I'm wrong. But for me, if the IRR is negative, do we even bother doing anything else?
No.
We're done. We're done. Remember, this is about decisions. If the effect is negative and we're business people, walk away. Walk away. So what I wanted you to see in this one is the simplification, and when you have a negative value in your continuation term, it's virtually impossible to overcome it with your explicit period, regardless of what's happening to the cash flow changes. Virtually impossible. It's just too big, because the continuation term is a perpetuity-based summation. It's an infinite summation. You just can't get ahead. Okay? What about the last one? Last one was kind of interesting. Sherry and Garrett.
Well, before, I understand that our cash flows are wrong, but can I have you check the numbers on your cash flows?
Yes?
Just 1,500 times 1 plus the growth rate.
Well, that just doesn't look right, does it?
No.
I'm not sure what you did. But I'm working up to it being your fault. So I think I've got a problem in mind. I threw this together just before walking in here.
Like ours are really wrong.
Oh yeah, yours are wrong too. And in this case, 2 wrongs maybe doesn't make it right, but it makes me less problematic, right? Yeah. So I'll update this and email it to you. So apparently I've got a wrong number here. But regardless, we have a different problem, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we may have several different problems as it turns out right now. So one of the things though is, yeah, they came up with their own cash flows, but that's not relevant at this moment, okay? That's just having enough time thinking it through, right? By the way, how much more difficult is it to come up with the right numbers when you're at a board and there's other people looking at you, talking to you, working with you? It's a little different, isn't it? Have some sympathy, okay? So the cash flows may not end up being right, but what was your real issue?
Well, should we work through it and then get there? Or
Let's work through it and get there. Good idea. That's why he makes the big bucks. Okay? So I think we have a CF at time 1 of 1,500. And we have an R, is it 7%?
Yeah.
And then G times 1 through 5 is 10%. And then G, as we move on out to infinity, is 7%. Okay, and I think the proposed cost was 20,000?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, so I've got cash flows, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one is 15,000. This one's going to be negative 20,000 when I actually get around to using it. So what is 15, I said 15,000, I meant 1,500, sorry. What's 1,500 times 1.1?
1650.
Times 1.1?
1850.
1850.
Times 1.1?
1997.
Times 1 point, what? Am I still at 1, or am I going to 7% now?
1.1.
I'm still at 1, aren't I, Sherry? 7% comes into play here, doesn't it? Okay, so times 1.1,
2196.
now times 1.07, right? Because now when we go into the 6th year, we're beyond our years 1 through 5 growth. We take now the next one, and what's it give us?
2340,
2350?
50.
Thank you. Okay,
In year 3, it's 1815.
thank you, I misheard that. Thank you. Okay, so now, that's all well and good. What do we have to do before we can do anything else?
C.
Hmm?
Do you need to get the CV for
We need the
this one?
CV.
Yeah. So
What's
that's
the CV?
gonna be year 6 divided by R minus G.
What's the CV? What's the number? Go to even calculate. What's the number?
Undefined.
How? Why is that?
Can't divide by 0.
R minus G. Sets up a 0 denominator, it's undefined. So we treat undefined as 0, don't we? Okay? In which case, we're going to have a 0 continuing value. We're going to add 0 to the year 5 cash flow. Why bother? And now we simply have, for the present value, the present value of those cash flows. For the net present value, the net present value of those cash flows. So now, let's come up with the present value. We use our cash flow function. By the way, did any of you have challenges by your calculator not being set to the right number of years to begin with when you did your cash flows? Okay. Did you all check it first to make sure? Good for you. That's I always do it every time. So 0 at 0, 1500 at 1, 1650 at 2, 1815 at 3, 1997 at 4, 2196 at 5, and then a discount rate of 7, and net present value. So the present value at 7413.84. Is that the right number? Is that what you guys got? Good. So now, what's my net present value? You don't need to rerun the numbers to get it. How do I find it, Garrett? How do I get my net present value without rerunning all those numbers? It's easy. You overthink things. You're just too smart. Sherry, how do I get it?
You just talked about it already.
Pardon me?
Just push your net present value.
No, I can't because I didn't put in a cost to begin with. I did 0 at 0. That's the hint, by the way, right? The present value minus the cost is the net present value. It's easy. It's easy when you have the data like this. You don't always have the data like this, okay? So in this case, I'm going to take that $7,413 that's on my screen, say minus $20,000. It gives me a negative net present value, 12,586 and change. It's my negative NPV. When you have a negative net present value that is that substantial against your present value, what do you know about your IRR? When your net present value is negative and and the absolute value of it is greater than your present value, what do you know about your IRR? Let me say it again. When the absolute value of your net present value, so strip it of the negative, when the absolute value of your net present value is greater than your present value, what do you know about your internal rate of return?
Greater than the
It's a good investment.
No? I understand why you're answering, because every other time I've not taken the absolute value of this, right? This number, this negative 12,586, isn't greater than my present value. It's less than my present value, right? And if the net present value, we think about it compared to 0 to think about whether IRR is greater than or less than the discount rate, right? When we have a negative net present value, and that negative is even greater than the present value, is there a return at all? There is no return. In fact, we're going to spend $7,413, excuse me, we're going to spend $20,000 and get back a negative. There is no return. If there's no return, there's no internal rate of return. Your calculator is going to show it as undefined. Now that's not because of the 0 denominator in the continuing term. That's because the price was so much greater than the present value. If we really paid $20,000 for this, but it estimated it as being worth only $7,413, we overpaid terribly. We're not going to have a return. We're upside down and we can't get away from it. And we can't get away from it because of the 0 denominator, though, right? If we'd gotten a positive denominator in our continuation term, even a mildly positive denominator, then it would have given us enough of a continuing value to overcome it. I hope this was helpful. Okay? All right. So let's talk briefly about modified internal rate of return on each unit. With a discount rate of 12%, an internal rate of return at 11.1%, what might we know about the modified internal rate of return? We didn't discuss this the other day, so it's not going to be in your notes. Think about it.
Lower.
Pardon?
Be slightly lower.
Yeah, yeah. So, but we talked about the inverse, right? When we said that the internal rate of return was greater than the discount rate, we know that the modified internal rate of return will be less than the IRR, but still greater than the discount rate. When it's just the opposite story, when the internal rate of return is less than the discount rate, then we know that the modified internal rate of return is going to be greater than the internal rate of return, but less than the discount rate. Okay?
So modified IRR just always lives between the two?
Let me think about that. I think so, yes. I think that's true. Somebody give me the critical difference between an IRR and a modified IRR. What's the one element that makes it so different?
The growth, they assume in the IR that's going to be constant for infinity, and then the modified.
I don't want you to talk about growth.
Okay.
This is a return. And the only reason I don't want you to talk about that, even though investors would, I don't want us to get confused between G and what's happening with IRR and MIRR. Okay?
So, return.
A return.
Is this
Assume that it's going to stay constant throughout infinity, or
Not exactly, but I think I know why you're saying that. So an internal rate of return is an extrapolated value. There isn't a singular equation that we have. In fact, I don't even know how we calculate it on our HP in a function. If you were using the underlying equation, or rather, excuse me, internal rate of return, it extrapolates through the calculator. It extrapolates through Excel. But there's no longhand equation, a singular equation we can use. And we know that its construction, when it's extrapolating, assumes that the cash flows are being reinvested at whatever this amalgamated number is becoming. Okay? Whereas a modified internal rate of return takes those cash flows and reinvests them at the discount rate. Reinvest them at the discount rate. So that, I think that's what you meant by it does not change. Okay? And it's a more realistic number in that respect. And there is an equation for it. I haven't given it to you, it's in your notes, but I haven't given it to you because I'm not holding you accountable for it, but I've shown you in Excel how to calculate it, and I don't know how you calculate it as a function in the HP. I don't think you can calculate it as a function. You can calculate it with the longhand stuff, but you don't need to. Okay? So, assuming the internal rate of return is greater than the discount rate, which would suggest that the net present value is what? Internal rate of return greater than discount rate. What does that tell us about the net present value?
Positive.
Positive. If that's the case, then is the modified internal rate of return greater or less than the internal rate of return? It's less than. It's in between the two, right? Okay. And just reverse that for the inverse. Okay. I'll fix those numbers and I'll email this out to you in just a little bit. Okay. So now let's turn our attention to sources of growth. So one of the things that's going to happen pretty quickly is we're going to have to start to think about not only the valuation model forms that use our cash flows, but we're going to have to think about how we get our cash flows, right? And the first thing to consider is the growth in our revenues. Because in our explicit period, we're going to be expressly or explicitly forecasting revenue, and then separately forecasting expenses, and maybe even changes in capital needs, like fixed assets, net working capital as such, so we can then calculate explicitly or expressly our free cash flow for every year, right? Okay. So the first forecast ratio that we'll end up dealing with will be a forecast ratio on sales or growth in sales. So when we think about growth, that's the kind of growth I want to think about now. I don't want you to get confused with the sales growth being the same thing as cash flow growth or even no plat growth. Oh, they start from the same nexus, but they may be different numbers. My sales might be growing at 10% and my free cash flow might only grow at 8%, right? It's an issue of what's happening with my expenses and capital needs as well. So I want to think about sales growth right now. How does a company bring about sales growth? Which is what commonly we think of as growth, right?
Marketing.
Marketing,
New products.
innovation,
Expansion.
so expansion of our domestic market, or maybe expansion into other markets if trade allows us to do that. What else?
Price changes.
Okay? That we choose, right? Okay? All of those are examples of organic, or sometimes thought of as endogenous, from inside the system, endogenous growth. R&D, innovation, changing in price because we believe we can increase it, right? Anything that lets us expand the number of units we're selling, expand the market we sell them into, all organic and endogenous. Is it cheap to grow your company from the inside? never cheap. Growth always comes at a cost, okay? So the question is going to become, is it cheap relative to other ways of doing it? Can you immediately grow your company from the inside? Can you have a series of board meetings today, have some decisions made over the next 10, 15, 30 days, and then the next day have expanded your company's growth by, or having doubled your revenue? No. Maybe if you're going from 1 penny to 2, right? But if you're going from $25 million, you're not going to go to 50 in that kind of time frame. So is it possible, though, with organic growth, to go from 25 million to 50 million? Over time. So of course it is. So I'm going to suggest to you that it's inexpensive. It takes a long time. That's not minus, that's a dash. Okay? And you can think through innovation, you can think through R&D, you can think through all of them. What's an alternative? Is the only way to grow my company by getting on the inside, working with my managers, and just growing it organically? Nickel?
I can acquire small companies.
Mergers and acquisitions, M&A. I love M&A. It's probably the sexiest part of the investment business, isn't it? They drive the best cars, they throw the best parties, okay, and they also snort the most coke. All right? It's the exciting part. It's the part you see movies made about. What are its pros? What are the benefits of growing through mergers and acquisitions?
It's instantaneous growth.
Nearly so, right? It's fast. We can make a decision today. You're a CEO, Mikkel's a CEO. You guys are our boards of directors. We have meetings. We figure out how to merge it, and all of a sudden, now we have a company that's got the combined revenues all but instantaneously. Now, instantaneously, sometimes, depending upon the size of the company, it might take you 3 years, okay? But that's depending upon the size. And you'd never have gotten organic growth of that dynamic in that time frame. So that can be good. Wall Street, does Wall Street like merger and acquisition activity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, in a big way. And it always rewards it immediately, and then sometimes the rest of the story, right? What doesn't it like about it, Mikkel?
Well, you can end up with a lot of friction that's within the business.
Have I talked to you about the Franklin Covey organization? Do you guys know Franklin Covey, a local company? Some of you do. So there was a company by the name of Franklin Day Planners. And for, believe it or not, for many generations, we used paper to keep our calendars and schedules. I know, right? Who would have thought such a thing? We actually wrote them down. In fact, on my desk for many, many years, I mean literally decades, there was a binder that sat, and it was open. Yeah, you had two sheets in front of you, and this one had my schedule for the day, and this one had all my notes for all the transactions, all the activities for that same day. And you flip it over, you got the same kind of thing. And in the brokerage industry that I grew up in, that was necessary. That became a legal document, okay? And Franklin was one of a number of companies that made these instruments, and they made little ones that would be all on, you can see a month on a page, or great big ones that you could see literally an hour on one page. You'd flip it over every hour, and everything in between. Lots of different ways of looking at time, right? It was all about organizing time efficiencies and such. So there was also a consulting apparatus that helped companies become more efficient with time. It was a big business. And Franklin was admittedly the king of this business nationally, maybe globally, but certainly nationally. And simultaneously, there was an organization in Provo. Franklin Day Planners was here in Salt Lake, but there was an organization in Provo, the Stephen Covey organization. And you guys may have heard the name Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He's written a lot of books. And he had a company that was growing at about the same time. It wasn't quite as big in terms of gross revenue, but it was extraordinarily profitable because it was all intellectual. They didn't print, ship, etc., anything. It was all consulting service. So it had very little cost of goods sold, right? Very profitable. Their profit mix was about the same. as a profit at the Covey organization, which means their free cash flow was probably relatively similar as well, but vastly different in scale in terms of gross revenue. Okay. And the Covey organization was all about consulting, all about cultures, all about organizing efficiencies, etc. So there's a really interesting overlap with what was happening in the Franklin organization. And they were both innovative. They were both heralded as being forward-thinking. They were on the cutting edge of how we would want to think about these things. And so, of course, it's a marriage made in heaven, or the point of the mountain or something, right? Provo and Salt Lake County. And so they merged. And Hiram Smith, the president of the Franklin organization, and Stephen Covey, the president of the Covey organization, they were so egalitarian, they got along so well, they decided to be co-presidents and co-CEOs. Which meant they had an equal amount to risk, and as it turns out, they ended up probably spending about the same amount on their lawyers when it was all said and done. Because very often, when you're merging two substantial things that have any level of maturity at all, we end up in divorce. You guys have never heard of such thing, I'm sure, right? We end up in divorce, and it was one of the messiest, stinkiest, horriblest corporate divorces in this part of the country. And it took two great companies and virtually destroyed them both. Do you guys know where Decker Lake is? It's on the other side of the valley. It's in West Valley. There's a big lake. There's actually a correctional facility next to it now because the Covey organization sold some of their property to the county. Well, actually, they had to give it up to the county because they couldn't afford to pay their taxes. And ultimately, the county put a correctional facility there for youth at Decker Lake. And there's also this really nice brick building out there. You can see it on 215, and it's probably 6 or 7 stories tall, and it kind of cascades down like this. It's a really cool brick building. You've seen it 100 times if you've driven out the valley. And that was the headquarters. Well, today, it's got a big executive suites deal, and there's about 70 different tiny little companies in there just trying to make it. And it just destroyed the companies because the cultures clash. The innovation, they came at it differently, and these two companies were always forward-thinking, were thinking at different forward points. They were actually not at all complementary. They were just disasters. So, M&A can be extraordinarily costly, and it's hard to make two things become one nicely, right? Yeah.
Would you say that was a one-off, not a one-off, but kind of a rare exception, because usually M&A is when a bigger company would be intentionally acquiring them?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. I don't think it was one-off, but I don't think it's the common occurrence. Okay. I think what made this unique was the dynamic of change, was just how bad it was. Okay. It was just terrible. It was expected to be great. In fact, when the merger was announced, stock price of both went up nicely. When the merger was finalized, in fact, the day that that stock hit the street as one company, it had a rally. It was amazing. And then over about a period of 2 years, it was back down well below what either company had been before, and within a year or so after that, it was delisted. Just destroyed the company. Because it was obvious, just things fell apart immediately. That's not unusual, but because they were equals or near equals, they took each other down at equal turns, destroyed each other. If it had been a big company getting a little, then maybe you wouldn't have seen such a horrible outcome. But you very often, even when it's a large company or small, you see some excitement. Well, it's going to be great. There's there's the dog and pony show, the CEOs, the boards, everybody are out there talking it up to the market. And then when it comes about, we don't realize the efficiencies and cost. We don't realize the dynamics of change in revenue. And there's friction inside, and so we end up very often with discounts. But sometimes over time that will rebuild, right? It wasn't a bad idea, it just took a while to get used to each other and to realize the efficiencies and the dynamics. So it's immediate, but it can be expensive in terms of stock value for those reasons and another. It's the most sexy part of investment banking. And investment banking, sexy equals big ticket items. right? So it's where the greatest part of fees are generated, commissions, bonuses are generated, right? You guys here are the investment bankers that handle it. You guys are the lawyers that dealt with putting it all together, because it's not only analyzing and having everything work out for regulatory stuff. You got all the laws, all the legal documents, all the reg documents to deal with. You guys then are the analysts that after the fact are kind of taking a look at this. And before, you've done some of that work as well. And you probably on a $100 million transaction, which is not a big transaction, you guys charged about $6 million. You guys charged $5 or $6 million, and you guys about $3 million. Okay, so I think I've got about $14 million here. On a $100 million transaction, that's 14%. That's not cheap. That's terribly expensive. So either way you look at it, it's expensive.
Why can't you do it for half price? Why can't I do it for half price?
Maybe you can. But one of the things is if you're doing it for half price, so you want to pay them $3.5 million, 3 and 1.5, okay? I think in the industry that we know it today, as well as in decades past, to get it done with the best, most accurate outcomes, accurate, not best in terms of long term, okay, accurate. Get the job done right. You're looking for the best talent, and that doesn't come cheap. That doesn't come cheap. When it comes to the investment banking side, there are cut-rate investment banking houses out there, but they're probably not going to be able to deliver to you the price at the opening, if you will, that you're looking for, because they don't have the apparatus, they don't have the distribution conduit, they just don't have the cold cranking amps of personality, network, and schmaltz. And the legal guys, I'm telling you right now, some of these things are extraordinarily complex in terms of the legalities. We're talking about merging radio station networks, and it turns out we overlap in some markets such that the FCC won't allow us to do that. So some of them we have to sell, some of them we have to just get rid of, and there's a lot that goes on in these. You can get it done for less, but I think that even the kind of dollars I'm talking about are where you've got relatively thrifty people negotiating for the best price they can get on the cost side and the brokerage side. It's expensive. And do we have data that would suggest M&A growth over time is better than, which means has a better outcome, than organic growth, or organic growth has a better outcome than M&A growth? Any idea?
I feel like organic would be better because it's more sustainable.
Yes. So as it turns out, we can look at industry segments, and we can look at types of firms, and we see that M&A might be better for some and organic for others, or vice versa, depending upon the industry segment, the type of firm, the size. Usually, big and small is better than equals, okay, as I pointed out in the Franklin Covey deal. But it's not predictable. It's a function of the personalities involved, the economic times in which it happens. I mean, you can take the two coolest companies in the world, and if you merge them at the onset of a recession, you're in trouble, right? You're just in trouble. So there's a lot that goes into it. Those are two very important ways. Can you think of any other way to bring about growth? Well, there's a couple of that are exogenous. We might say that M&A is exogenous. So if to the inside of one company, But it might still be endogenous to the two companies together, right? They now are the system, okay? But there's some exogeneity. Think about macroeconomic concepts. Is there anything about the macroeconomy that might grow our revenues? What?
Say you're selling oil and China has an oil crisis and all of a sudden they need twice as much oil.
Sure. So is that going to change the price of oil here, increase our revenues here, even if we're not selling to China?
Yeah.
Yeah, you bet it is. Because if the price goes up, the price goes up. Whether that's an issue of international trade exchanges or an issue just of inflation, if the price goes up, the price goes up, the revenues rose. And there's a pretty good possibility that the cost rose also, but not necessarily, right? Depends on how closely related my inputs are to my output. Price of labor may not have changed, but the price of getting it out of the ground because of leases or trade embargoes or tariffs. Tariffs, that's not new, certainly a new hot topic, but they're not new, right? So think about macroeconomic issues, including globalization. Globalization become a significant driver of revenue growth for companies? When trade barriers between the U.S. and China began to fall, China started selling a lot more to the U.S. That means Chinese companies' revenues went up, right? And U.S. companies started selling a lot more to China just because the barriers were falling. Absolutely. Globalization has a big effect on revenue. And for some companies, the effect is big and it's positive. For some companies, the effect is big and it's negative, right? Because now, all of a sudden, I can buy from China, which I used to buy from a company in Wisconsin. Only the Chinese workers were getting paid 7 cents an hour, and the Wisconsin people wanted $82 an hour to make the same product. So it can make a big difference. And I'm being obtuse when I give those examples, right? But you see my point. I'm just going to say population changes. So if I produce milk in the United States, and the population of the United States goes from 100 million people to 150 million people, does the revenue that I get for the milk I sell go up?
Yes.
Yeah, sure it does. It's just the scale of the operation, right? May have nothing to do with organic and inorganic with respect to business systems. May have nothing to do with macroeconomic changes. Or it may simply be, that may be a function of immigration, right? Or maybe a function of tastes and preferences. If we start to prefer larger families, larger households. Right? Or something else in our economy takes place in society such that we each live longer. Well, that's not a change in the number of the population of birth necessarily, but it will change the number of people alive at any point in time in relatively short order, right? So those are all where growth comes from. Now you can think about growth at your firm level, or the industry in which your firm exists, or the market in which your firm resides, or the nation state level and such. So if I'm thinking about coming up with a growth forecast, and I know that we're looking at a 3% GDP increase, I'm looking at an industry seems to have about a 5% industry growth. My firm has a 10% growth plan. And we're looking at a 2% best owner premium if we put these companies together. How are we going to use those numbers to think about the revenue growth of the company? Well, if the industry analysts believe we're going to see about a 5% growth, is that probably already taken into account expected changes in GDP?
Yeah.
I think so, because the industry is part of the nation that this GDP change is taking place in. So we're not going to add these two together, right? They're redundant. If my firm has a growth plan of 10%, do I have a similar scenario, or am I going to add this 10 to this 5? I think the way I stated it is very similar, right? Now, if we had said 10% over and above the rest of the industry, that would have been different, right? In which case, we have to think about 10%, is it nominal or is it proportional? If it's nominal, I add the 10% to the 5%, right? If it's proportional, then I take 5% plus 10% of 5%, which would have then taken me from 5 to 5.5. So you may have to think about some of the different cases put before you, the problem sets, and how these growth numbers are discussed. You may have to think about how industry values are stated. You may have to think about how your own analysts have represented things. Nominal, proportional, or are they redundant? When I say a best owner premium, what am I talking about? Any ideas, just by the way it's referenced? So here we have Bobby. And Bobby, as it turns out, is a crack CEO. His company is a track record of extraordinary growth. It happens to be a leader in the industry. Makes ball bearings. Really sexy stuff, Bobby. Whew. Ball bearings, all right? And my company, much smaller, and let's face it, it's my company, so it's barely running, right? And Bobby realizes if he buys my company, then he probably can get a better price than I get. Mine's very small compared to his, right? Better price for his raw inputs, because I'm paying $50 a ton for my inputs, but he's only paying $27 a ton for his because he buys so much more. And he's got a sales and marketing apparatus that puts mine to shame. And by the way, my managers are lackluster. Is it possible that in his company's hands, my company would perform better? Lower raw material inputs, better sales and marketing, better managed. If not only possible, it's better, right? If it doesn't, something is badly wrong. We can say that Bobby owning the company might have a best owner premium. Might be able to get more sales. In fact, maybe one of those premiums is because maybe my ball bearings are slightly different in type. They service different pieces of equipment than his. Some of them, I've got some patents on those even. And so he knows some of his customers currently aren't buying my ball bearings, and mine aren't buying his. And if we put the two companies together, all of a sudden, my products are available to his customers at a better price. Oh, that's wonderful. That's a match made in heaven, right? So think about best owner premiums, or the scale benefit, the premium benefit that might occur, the combination of revenue and expense when an entity is owned by a better owner. And better may not be because the management's better, it may just be a function of scale. Yeah.
If you are the company that is selling the Bobby, for example, is that what you're saying, is that you can kind of add that into your valuation, saying with our certain situation with their...
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. But, Brigham, if I'm doing that, we're almost done. If I'm doing that, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to try to inform what I might be willing to pay for it, right? I'm not going to do that if I'm thinking about giving it a valuation from the standpoint of the current owner, right? Standpoint of the current owner, those things aren't available because the current owner doesn't have that additional benefit. So we have to always be thinking about from whose advantage or vantage point are we doing the valuation, okay? So when you think about growth in revenue, you might have to think about any and all of these things and many more. You have to decide which ones are already cooked into the other numbers, so we wouldn't add them together. Which ones might be proportional, which ones might be nominal, which ones might be from the perspective of the firm, which ones might be from the perspective of a different owner. And there's a little bit of complexity in that. So when we start to forecast, we forecast revenue first. And then we're going to start to think about forecasting expenses, and then changes in capital needs, which let us forecast free cash flow. We do this during the explicit period, right? We're going to walk through forecasting of the other items here, I think, next week. I think we'll spend more time on Wednesday, if I remember correctly, looking at the next Excel assignment, and then thinking about these valuation frameworks a little bit more. Any questions? Okay, I'll get that email out to you with that revised set of numbers on that final panel here in a little bit, and we're done.